Welcome everyone to another installment of Teach, Reflect, Recharge, Repeat, brought to you by PD Reimagined. Of course, as you all know, PD Reimagined is a free program that aims to support and inspire and show appreciation for all the amazing educators, that's you, who've probably one of the most important jobs of guiding our future thinkers. So if you want to learn more about that program, check out pdreimagined.com. I'm Nadine Levitt, your host, and this is Summit 5, or Episode 5, I guess, of the 23-24 season. And today we are chatting with the lovely Eve Rodsky, a grad from University of Michigan, which I'm very excited about. Go Blue. And also Harvard for her JD, then a former lawyer, a mom, a dancer, sometimes a policy, policy influencer, let's say, and best-selling author of 2 amazing books, likely to be more since I'm sure this is going to be 2 of a series. Those books are, of course, Fair Play, which you had in your inspiration boxes this month, and also Find Your Unicorn Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World. A friend of mine, just as background, had told me to listen to a podcast a while ago called News Not Noise with Jessica Yellen. And she was interviewing Eve, and my friend said, you have to listen to this interview. I think it'll be really, really interesting to you and also your teachers. And of course, it was a really, really busy time. And of course, I then didn't listen to this podcast for a long time, and she kept asking me about it. So finally, on my way to her house, I said, okay, I'm going to commit to this podcast. And I listened to it and of course found myself in tears on the 405. I simply knew at that point that I had to find a way to get to her and have her share a message with all of you guys. So I'm so happy that I managed to stalk her. I found her through a lot of friends. I think I asked about 20 or 30 different people. Finally, somebody knew who she was and introduced me, and here we are. So Eve, thank you. Thank you for not thinking I'm nuts, and thank you for coming today.
Gosh, not at all. And thank you all for being part of the care movement. Educators are at the front lines of the care movement, and a lot of the unpaid, invisible labor of the social safety net is thrown on you because we don't have one in America. So I feel very, very closely connected to teachers in this movement, and I feel really happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think. Okay, we'll dive into this in a minute about why teachers specifically and anyone in the care sort of industry, why this is so relevant to people that work in those industries. But first, before we do that, I know a lot of people sort of talk about your journey, especially as an author, how it started from a blueberry breakdown. Again, another story that we're going to delve into in a minute, but I wanted to start a little bit before that, if I may, and figure out who you were sort of as a child. Like, can you share a little bit about your upbringing? Like, were you always such a confident sort of go-getter kid who knew that she had to change the world in a positive way?
Well, thank you for that question. I don't usually get to go back that far, but I will tell you in 3rd grade on my what do you want to be when you grow up board, for my 3rd grade teacher didn't say expert on the gender division of labor. I'll tell you that. It probably said like astronaut or I don't know, veterinarian. So I didn't know that this career path was going to be in the cards for me. But what I did know was that, in fact, I was a parental child. I think that's the term now. So I was raised by a single mother in the public school system in Lower Manhattan. And so again, shout out to all the public school teachers here. And so I felt very, that's my alarm. I felt very responsible for my mother. My father had left. I have a disabled younger brother. And so I was helping her with rent checks around 7, 8 years old, reminding her that we were out of milk so that we wouldn't have to drink powdered milk, which was disgusting and vile. And that sort of, and in fact, the other sort of, unpaid labor that my mother did at the time was really looking into and researching schools. We grew up on Avenue C and 14th Street in the 1980s, which was zoned for a public school that had actually a lot of school-based violence, even the elementary school. So that's what I remember about my childhood. I had to lie because my mother, she stole her friend's address. And so I remember feeling like I was a criminal And, I know that some women of color have actually gone to jail for that. So that didn't happen to my mother, but I do remember feeling like I was going to be found out any moment. So that's what I remember about my childhood, having to lie to get into my public school by using a fake address.
But interestingly, that care piece already came in very early then.
Yes, I knew I wanted something different for myself because I saw how hard it was for my mother. I mean, she literally, the metaphor of fair play is a cards game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll bring that in early. She held all the cards. And she really, as I say in the book, she traded, acrimony for alimony for no acrimony.
Mm-hmm.
So she really didn't get a lot of financial help for all the unpaid labor she was doing. So yeah, I saw this very early and I sort of vowed to do it differently. And I thought I married an equal partner because I wanted to do it differently than she had done. But all that comes to that's all a lie, until children
Mm-hmm.
come. And again, I sort of wish I knew that because the only sort of feminist advice I had heard in, say 2005 and a little bit later was sort of the lean in advice, which is like marry a good partner, but it doesn't work like that. Men do 5 to 15 hours a week less after kids come along. If I had even known that statistic, instead of what to expect, what you're expecting, which all I knew was that my child was like a jelly bean size, then I think my whole life would be different. And Nadine, as the ghosts of Christmas future, I don't want that ever to happen to people coming up behind me. So that's sort of the stuff that informs fair play. But it started off in my childhood being a caregiver for a disabled brother who I'm still a caregiver for now, and my mother.
Mm-hmm. So how did you end up then being a lawyer? Like why law? Why did you go into that world?
Well, it's interesting because I actually think it has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. I actually went into law because I was really interested in the behavior design aspect of it, which ultimately is what fair play is. It's a tool for behavior design, for
Mm-hmm.
structured decision making, which is the opposite of assumption, the way to end bias. If you don't believe me, you can read all the books about bias. One of the ways to end bias is to move from assumption to structured decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want you all to yell at me saying I'm assuming that everyone here is married or married to a man, but I am going to sort of center the hetero cisgender relationship when we talk about that, because that's where the patriarchy is sort of where putting men's need first definition of a patriarchy sort of is the reason why a lot of these problems happen, Nadine. So I'm not assuming things, but I am going to center a certain type of dynamic.
Sure.
And I think it's just really important to understand that, nobody goes into sort of a relationship, or even a career necessarily knowing what they're going to do with it. And for me, the law was interesting to me because I realized that if somebody wanted to stop someone from voting in Georgia, they're going to pass a law to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to have somebody stop at a stop sign, they're going to pass a law to do that. So I felt like there was a lot of power in the behavior design of the legal system. And so that's why I got into it.
I think I heard you talk about that. It was really you as a lawyer that you started seeing a pattern to what you needed to run a successful organization or for this behavioral change. And those obviously were boundary systems and communication. I said obviously because you touched on it.
You know me now. Yes.
So can you explain that a little bit? Like why those three? So
my work, and you can all feel bad for me, as I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. But what I do for those families is I do take complex family businesses and family foundations, and I help them run better with some grace and humor and generosity, Nadine.
Mm-hmm.
That is sort of what I did with my legal career. And a lot of that is rooted in organizational management science. And what's interesting about being a lawyer is you work in governance, you work in organizational management. And what that really means is it's laws, it's rules to run a successful organization, whether it's a classroom or whether it's a family business. I believe that successful organizations, and what I've been teaching in my practice, require three things: boundaries, systems, communication. That ended up being very relevant because when my second son, Ben, was born, and I decided that I had two choices, which was to eat, pray, love it out of my marriage, or to stay and become a terrible, gray version of myself as I was losing myself in all the unpaid labor of the home. I decided to really pursue this behavior design third path, which was this idea that maybe our homes are organizations, and there was new learnings that I could bring to the home because I was coming at it different than a psychologist would or even a sociologist would. I'm coming at this as a behavior designer with the understanding that the home is an organization, just like the classroom is an organization.
And schools.
And exactly. And so I decided to research and think about the home as an organization that would need boundary systems and communication. And that is sort of how the fair play movement was launched.
Can you give some examples of all three of those? So boundaries, what do you mean by boundaries? What do you mean by obviously communication? But it's not as obvious as you think what good communication is in the practice of it, right? And then and what kind of systems? Can you give me some examples of each of those just to put things into perspectives?
Yes. So I found it really interesting that really the only organizations that we really call organizations are maybe big corporations, whereas I was seeing people anecdotally after I started to want to research these issues, saying things to me like, I'm a systems analyst in my day job, or I'm a coach who had literally never put in a point guard for my center unless you're LeBron James. They have all these systems in their life, but at home, one man, this was his quote, they wait to decide who's taking the dog out right when it's about to take a piss on the rug. A man who designed systems all day long, right? And teachers are the best at systems. What I love about Anna's kindergarten teacher last year was that there was a whole board that said the steps of what you had to do that morning. You put your water bottle in the water bottle parking lot. You go sit on your round, she was red that week, the round red dot, which she was the red line that week. So I think you're extra apt to understand my point about how important it is to help people make decisions before they have to make decisions. That's what leads to chaos when you have to make the same decision over and over again. If people know, including students, right, that they have to line up, their water bottle goes somewhere and they're in the red line that week, it makes the morning go smoother because the expectations are meeting reality. In the home, it wasn't like that, Nadine. Even my aunt's Mahjong group, my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group had more clearly defined expectations in the home. You don't bring snack twice to that group, you're out.
Yeah.
But the home is one where it was really, really completely chaotic. And on top of that, what I started noticing, and this was really after, again, like I said to you, my second son was born, where I never, ever heard these terms that we're going to be talking about. But what happened to me was I was on a breast cancer march with very, powerful women who use their voice in their day job. And I read about this in Fair Play, this moment of being with 10 women. Not all of them were married to men, but it was a Saturday morning. We were there in pink, sort of like I am today, honoring a friend who had been recently diagnosed. And as we're having this morning, we're having this really fun morning together, sort of this communal experience, marching for breast cancer awareness until noon happened. And at noon, what happens is we literally all turned into pumpkins. All of a sudden, I'm watching everybody look at their phones. And what is happening is the women who are married to men are getting texts like, when are you coming home from the parade? That was a real one. Where's Hudson's soccer bag? I can't take him to practice unless you tell me where it is. What's the address of the birthday party? Did you leave me a gift? My favorite was my friend Kate's husband, and his text was, do the kids need to eat lunch? And so what I noticed about that day was these women all didn't say to me, this is crazy, I'm ignoring my phone. They all left me, Nadine. They didn't come to lunch with me because they said, I left my partner with too much to do. I have to go get the water bottle. I have to go bring the Hudson soccer bag. I have to bring a perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party. So that day was a day where I said, let's have an act of resistance. So I had them count up how many phone calls and texts we received. We had 37 texts and 40 phone messages for 10 women over 30 minutes. And so I didn't understand that the home was an organization at that point. All I knew is I had extreme and total rage at my partner and for the women around me for everything that they were shouldering and carrying. And all I knew from that day on was that I pledged to understand more about what was happening to us. So what is happening to us and women is that women shoulder 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. And they do that. And
that's in every country in the world.
Every country in the world. It's worse. It's worse in other countries. It's 2/3 in America, and it's more in other industrial nations. And it's even this bad in Nordic countries where everybody says everybody's doing better. They're actually not. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Every single nation in the world, women shoulder at least 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. And then how we know it's a gender issue and not a money issue is that as women earn more financial power, Nadine, they do more housework and childcare.
So I believe that.
That phenomenon is not new. I call it the same shit, different decade. It's been called the second shift. It's been called emotional labor. It's been called the mental load. But my favorite term was a term called invisible work, coined in 1986 by a sociologist named Arlene Kaplan-Daniels, who argued that the work of care, including what teachers do, has to be undervalued. Because if we paid a wage for housework and for teaching, then the economy would collapse.
Yeah.
So we're going to occupationally segregate the schools so that men become principals, they get the higher salaries, women are the teachers, women are also the unpaid labor doers, which this is the fair play cards. We'll talk about all the metaphor of what this is, of the 100 tasks that it takes to run a home and family. And we do that on purpose, and we make it invisible, because if we made it invisible, American society would collapse.
And we do have some men in our program who are teachers as well. Right. But it's the same concept, right? Where I look at it from something you said in I can't remember what it was an interview you gave, and you talked about time, the valuation of time. And you talked about how a lot of women's time is really regarded as infinite and therefore not valuable, like sand, while men's time was largely diamonds and had to be guarded and was finite. And it's such a socially conditioned perspective. And it's funny because I come from a unit where, my husband is super, super supportive. I'm very well supported. I'm lucky that I have a great team around me. 2 kids who try their best and want to do the right thing. But even I didn't even identify exactly all the things that I do, because I just take it for granted that that's something that I would do. And so what I loved about your work is that it really made visible all those invisible tasks. And when I read your book, I then tried to write down, well, what are all those things that I do? And luckily we don't have to do all that, because there's also a deck of cards. And what I like about the cards is it's kind of like a prompt, because at first I was like doing just the big ticket things. Like, for me, it was kids scheduling, right? And yes, we have someone who helps us clean the house, but I have to clean the house in between, right? There's a tidy and there's a clean piece. And so every day you suddenly find yourself spending, call it an hour a day cleaning the house, but I don't even count that as a task that I would do. I don't even see it as a task that I would do until you brought it to light. And when you think about, I was also a lawyer, when you think about what I would have charged as a lawyer per hour, those things add up. And so making that visible and letting yourself appreciate all that you do, as well as letting other people start to see, okay, here's all the stuff that needs to get done, and I don't want to do it all. And so approaching it from a systems perspective, right. And even for me, the boundaries and the communications were also really a part of a system, right? That you're basically saying, let's talk before I have to talk. Let's figure out the boundaries before it becomes too big an issue. And it's all about managing expectations. So I loved your work. But can we go back to the blueberries breakdown and just sort of talk about, because I think one of the reasons that it's so telling, like this work is so relatable to so many people, I think, is that it was born out of your own need, right?
Yes. Yes. I think you said something though important I want to get back to though, which is you said you were doing tasks that you were taking for granted were yours to do. If I had to sum up my favorite quote about somebody who said what fair play taught them, it was a woman who told me that fair play taught her that she doesn't have a magical vagina that whispers in her ear what her husband's mother wants for Christmas.
True.
That's basically what fair play is in one word. It is trading again, and this doesn't have to, it could be the other way around, right? It could be, and we have many men who are in the fair play system who were the ones whose wives have ADHD or other neurodivergence and who are shouldering most of the unpaid labor. So, but because of the statistic, again, I speak a lot to women. That is, as I said earlier, one of the most important ways to end bias is to move from those assumptions to structured decision-making tools. And so for me, the origin story of this was around that breast cancer march. When I was waking up to these issues, Seth decided to send me a text that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." Now, maybe that text wouldn't have been so terrible like in another day, but the day that I got this text was a day that I was running to a toddler transition program, which, as you all know, like in America, they last like maybe, 2 hours at the most.
3 seconds, I was going to say.
3 seconds, yes. And so I was racing to pick up a toddler. I had a newborn baby at home. I had a diaper bag and a breast pump in the passenger seat of my car. I had gifts for a newborn baby to return in the backseat of my car. I had a client contract in my lap because actually I had opted out of the workforce. Now I say I was forced out of the corporate workforce and I was starting my own business, which I think a lot of us think is better because it's more flexible, but it's very hard to be self-employed in America. And so that was the context of getting and receiving this text on the way to pick up Zach. "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And it made me cry. I pulled over to the side of the road, which you don't do lightly in LA. And I think the things I was thinking that day was, one, how did I get here? Because as I said to you earlier, I had vowed that I was going to have an equal partner in my relationship. And two, how did I become basically the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs? That's sort of where that was like the role that I felt I was living. And why it was also hard was because at the same time, I actually felt very abandoned by that toddler transition program, because when I walked in, the preschool teacher nicely said, "This will be your community. You're going to know these people through 6th grade. You'll love them all. Welcome to our school." But she also gave me a name tag that said Zach's mom. So I felt like, wow, this person thinks these are the people that are going to know me better than anyone's ever known me. They don't even know my fucking name. That's how I felt. So I felt abandoned by that safety net. And then on top of that, my workplace had basically thrown me out by saying if I wanted to pump breast milk, I'd have to do it in a broom closet and bring a battery pack because there was no outlet, and that I was going to lose my direct reports. So that's why I think that time was really, really hard. But I will say that it was women like you here and some of the men as well that saved me. Because what I did after that, my biggest act of resistance was after I'd read that Invisible Work article, was I took what we do for a living as behavior designers and lawyers. And we always say from Peter Drucker's management, and it was called the Should I Do spreadsheet. That Should I Do spreadsheet was so powerful because I love Excel, and it was fun to have 98 tabs and over 2,000 items of invisible work. But it allowed me to see people like Deb and Sarah or Julia and say to them, what do you do that may be invisible to your partner that takes over 2 minutes? And I may not have known a Sarah or a Deb or a Julia, but I'll tell you by the end of that interview, they were a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time in my life I didn't feel alone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me 9 months. And ultimately, as I said, it ended up being 98 tabs and 2,000 items of invisible work. And what was so beautiful about it was I'd have people like Deb say, oh, okay, I see that you on tab 4, on line 7, you have application of sunscreen, but you note that that takes 2 minutes. What about 30 minutes for the chase? And I'd be like, okay, Deb, 30 minutes for the chase. Or I'd have women, right, that look like Sarah, and they'd say, okay, I see you have a tab called extracurricular non-sports. But in that tab, you have lots of instrument playing, but you don't have Girl Scout cookies ordering in sales. I said, okay, Girl Scout cookies ordering in sales. And so ultimately that document was sent to my husband with all of the amazing communication skills that I teach my clients. That's being very sarcastic. In fact, I just sent it to him with a WeTransfer or whatever you could send back then in like 2012 that basically just said, can't wait to discuss. And as you can imagine, the response I got was not the one I was looking for, which was I got a monkey emoji, a pixelated early version of the see no evil emoji. And I think that was the most important day, Nadine, of this entire movement, because what I realized then was that lists alone don't work. And we've been telling women that was the only advice I could find until I wrote Fair Play, make a list. You know, even my couples therapist said that, just make a list. Seth will help you if you just tell him what to do. And I realized that that is not helpful at all. It adds to our mental load and actually we've now found unleashing that consciousness of a list without a solution actually makes things worse.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be releasing data soon that will show that. The consciousness without a solution.
That's so interesting. I love lists. I love writing lists. I love Excel spreadsheets. Sometimes I write things on lists though that I've already done just to like make myself feel better.
List for yourself is great, but does anybody, if you've ever handed a list to somebody else without any context,
yes, no, 100%.
They're going to do that list?
100%.
And I just even mean a child too. You think you could go and be like, here, kids, here's our 8 activities for the day. Just go for it. It doesn't work that way. Without context, lists don't work. Systems do though. And that's ultimately what I knew and knew how to design. And so of that boundary systems communication organizational formula, Nadine, of course, I started with the easiest thing for myself, which was starting with systems.
This is fascinating. So what I love about this, so it hasn't just, I mean, it's not limited to a book, right? No, so this is a book, and then it was cards, and then it was you got Hello Sunshine involved with Reese Witherspoon. Was she involved before this?
No, exactly. she got involved after that. And Jennifer Newsom, actually the first partner of California, is our director of that documentary. You can find it on Hulu. It's called Fair Play. It's very funny because it's couples that are literally the entire United States. They all look very different from each other, but they're all struggling with the similar things, which are how literally disabling housework and childcare and running a family and care is in this country without any social safety net, as we said earlier.
What I love about this, though, it is you've taken this also into policy work.
Yes. Yeah.
So you've had some exciting developments in this space. Do you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to say to all of you, you know, you are essential workers in many states. You as educators and teachers, you've had a huge burden on you, and there's a lot of emotional labor already in your job. And so I just want to say that I also see you because teachers, women female identified teachers also were one of my sort of red flag professions, where they're also shouldering a lot of unpaid labor at home because they have this myth that their job is more flexible. I don't know where that comes from. Some people said it's because maybe you have quote unquote summers off, but because you have so much emotional labor and you're shouldering so much unpaid labor at home, we've noticed that teachers are actually getting sick from this. So that is part of our policy work. So we've been able to follow 200 women for 10 years, basically, and hundreds of thousands of other data points. But of those 200 women, some of them are educators. And what we found is that women who tell us that they work full-time for pay, even part-time and, for pay, and shoulder the unpaid labor, like I said, of the metaphor of these 100 cards. There's 70 cards if you don't have children, there's 60 if you don't have children, 40 if you add children to the mix. So I think that's why a lot of people in Gen Z are saying they don't want to have children, because who wants to double their work without having any social safety net or money to do that? But that's a different conversation, Nadine. So I will say for educators, this is a very near and dear topic to my heart, because the policy is on many different levels. Individual, it's sort of like the public health model. We have cards for you. We're going to send them all to you, hopefully the cards. And we can send anybody a care package. Just email me at Eve Rodsky. For educators, I will do anything for you. And they're also free online at fairplaylife.com. You can do it as an exercise for your school. We have a home equity curriculum for your classroom. So we'll talk all about that. But I think that we're looking at this.
And we'll add all those links. We'll add all those
links, please. And please, Nadine, include the home equity classroom work, because we're trying to change home economics into home equity curriculum for all teachers, all grades. But we look at it as the individual actor. So what's happening to you all individually as humans, as caregivers, and also as teachers who have emotional labor? What's happening in the community level? And that a big question for our community research was, why do schools call women first? That was an interesting
because they pick up
to do. Exactly. Not because they're first on the call list, but because they don't want to bother men. That was the second most popular response. And first most popular response was because women are the ones picking up. So we can all do a better job with that. And you can demand your school call men first. You can also demand your school have a 50-50 gender equity on the PTA. That's a big thing I'm asking of you. I will give you all the resources in the world if you can help me be cultural warriors to demand gender equity in your PTA and the unpaid labor of the community. So we have a community aspect of the movement, Nadine. We also have a state level aspect where we're running some pilots into an AARP model for care, like an AACP, where we're trying to get more political power at the state level for caregivers. And then the federal level, of course, childcare and paid leave. So this is, we understand that me telling you to right the wrongs of unpaid labor in your home is not going to change the systemic level. But I also believe that you can make things better in your own home. Because like I said, I don't believe that it's okay, especially for the educators that we saw in that early part of the study. Every one of those 200 women that we identified in the past 10 years who said that they worked full-time and held more than 67 cards, Nadine, are all being treated for a stress-related illness. It wasn't even 199 or 198. It was 200 women being treated for a stress-related illness. There were about 17 women that were not being treated actively by a doctor for stress-related illnesses, like hair loss, insomnia, SSRI use, thyroid, cancer diagnoses. But around those 17 women were telling me that edibles and mommy juice and doom scrolling were part of the numbing part, incessantly watching television. These hedonic pursuits were becoming part of their coping mechanisms. And so that's why I'm here, because not only are you going to help me with the home equity curriculum and the gender parity and the PTA, but I don't want you to get sick. I need educators to be okay. And I don't want you to get sick. And so these are very important issues to bring up.
So this is a really elegant backing into your next book. And one of the reasons, so this program, PD Reimagined, that's creating this content, is very much about using inspiration and appreciation and support in order to counter the burden of overwhelm and burnout. So at the end of the day, we're all just energy, and we're walking into the room and we have a lot of different things pulling at us. But if we can be feeling appreciated, and if we can be inspired, and if we can have the best energy walking into a room, then we're going to have better skills to deal with problem solving and so on and so forth. So I think what I love about your second book is that it really talks about what can we do now. So say the first book is all about unveiling that there is an issue with time parity, right? Or the equality of time. And how do we equalize that a little bit? And then the second book says, okay, now if you've made the time, what do you do with it? And I think it's really, really, this is what had me in tears in the 405, FYI, because I am by nature a very creative person. I have a lot of different sort of things that I do. But I was finding myself overwhelmed, and I was finding myself really unexcited by a lot of the things that I was doing. And to renew my energy around it required me to take a little bit of time to think, well, what is it that's actually fueling my soul? And what is it that's actually giving back to me? And I loved the advice that you gave. So I want you to explain a little bit how you came to writing about the unicorn space and reclaiming creativity, and what role creativity specifically plays in warding off burnout, and why it's an anecdote for.
I love it. And for those who have their camera on, we may have to call on you. It's like a game show. You're going to get a prize, but I know we have 15 minutes left. So we'll call this a 101 primer. We can always come back. People can find me, like I said, at Eve Rodsky, if you have more questions about the specifics of all of the things we're talking about. But I want to enter us into an exercise that I think we can all do together, but explain sort of the context. So again, on my third grade, what do you want to be when you grow up board? It didn't say expert on the gender division of labor. It didn't say someone who would write a book about creativity. I'm incredibly left brain. I love systems, and I don't like creativity, or I don't even like that word. But what was happening was I had so many women, even like powerful CEOs, when I start to ask them, what would you do with the time you got back if you could get some of the unpaid labor off your plate? I would hear things like shopping. I would get my hair done. Maybe I would get some time for exercise. So I was getting a little alarmed that I wasn't hearing a lot of what makes you you in those conversations. Again, not shaming anybody, because I get it. Like if I'm here to tell you, as much as I love the productivity experts I sit on panels with, a lot of them are white men with stay-at-home wives who say things like, you need 2 uninterrupted work days a week. Okay, women are uninterrupted every 3 minutes and 42 seconds. That was one time you surveyed during the pandemic. So I do sometimes think that that narrative isn't so helpful. So again, telling you to live a creative life without acknowledging fair play would be terrible, actually, and it would be counterproductive. So if you understand, and I understand that there are barriers, then what I have to do is convince you that it's not optional, that you can't wait till your kids are in college or having another season of your life. So I'll tell you why. So what we found out in this, or what I was able to find out over the course of researching 2 books, was that our American culture has been hijacked by happiness. And even some educators, not having been hijacked by that, but will say, I have a gratitude journal practice for my kids. That's all fine and good. But happiness, the pursuit of happiness actually makes us more sad. And that's in fact because the actual true definition of mental health that you want for your students and yourself and your kids is, Nadine, we want to have appropriate emotions at appropriate times and the ability and strength to weather them. That's actually the true definition of mental health after interviewing expert after expert after expert. So if that's the true definition of mental health, then as you said, the appropriate emotions for most of midlife are going to be overwhelm and boredom. That was our 2 big ones on our word cloud, and anger and resentment and all the things I was feeling after, my second son was born, and burnout. Those are appropriate emotions. And you're having them probably at appropriate times. When you're in your classroom or you're asked to do more emotional labor, or when you're with your family and your partner doesn't put the garbage liner back in, whatever it is. Those are appropriate times, but it's really the ability and strength to weather it. So that's the nuance. So we're going to cope with overwhelm and boredom. Those are appropriate emotions, or rage or sadness. But typically, if we don't recognize that we need what I call something called unicorn space, and I only call that not because I think you're all 4th grade, people who believe in magical beings, but because like a mythical unicorn, it doesn't exist. It's beautiful, but it really does not exist unless we sort of conjure it. That's why it's called unicorn space. So that's what I'm trying to explain to people, that our ability and strength to weather it can either be through eudaimonic pursuits or hedonic pursuits. And unicorn space are what we call eudaimonic pursuits. They are things that make you, when you're done with them, say, I can't believe I just did that.
Mm-hmm.
Hedonic pursuits make you feel like, shit, I can't believe I just did that. That's the difference. We want people to have the, I can't believe I just did that, because that's a dopamine response that actually is really, really healthy for you. It has oxytocin, it has endorphins, it has all these amazing things that are happening. The hedonic pursuits, unfortunately, are very, very short-lived. And that's the emotional eating, the doom scrolling, the incessantly watching television, the edibles, the mommy juice. So instead, or in addition to, I like to call this unicorn space, where I'm asking people to believe me that your mental health depends on you weathering those appropriate emotions and having a life that you're consistently interested in is the only formula I can give you. I can't tell you to walk around the block. I can't tell you it's a drink every week with a girlfriend or a friend. Unfortunately, the only antidote to burnout I can give all of you is saying that you deserve and need to be consistently interested in your own life. So if I say that, Nadine, can you tell what word in our surveys is most triggering to people? What would you think is most triggering of that sentence?
Of which sentence, sorry?
Being my sort of prescription of being consistently interested in your own life.
Is it own, like
No.
your own, or is it consistently?
Yeah. It's yes, it's the consistency of it.
Because I think it's very easy to say I'm consistently interested in somebody else's.
Right.
That's why I was like, I'm not sure if it's own or if it's consistent. But you also make a really good point that it's not, it doesn't mean that you're going to enjoy every minute of actually doing it. Because sometimes it's really hard. And sometimes you're like, well, what am I doing? And you have the doubt and you have all the fear and you have all those big feelings as you're doing whatever it is that is your unicorn space. And it's supposed to have some fear, I think, attached to it personally.
It has to.
Because otherwise you don't feel that rush of, oh, I'm so glad I did that.
Well, I think it has three things that we found. It has curiosity, values-led curiosity, connection, and completion. Mm-hmm. So why I can't prescribe just a spin class, even though I love like a soul cycle class, is because I'm not getting that recipe of I wonder X, I am sharing myself with the world X, and I'm completing X. If I was teaching a class, it would do that. And so that's why I thought it would be fun. We can end on a exercise. If you want to pick somebody for me if you want to turn your camera off, you can, but if your camera's on, we want to pick you. I'm going to show you how we can start thinking about unicorn space. It'll be a fun activity to end on. But what I want to say why it's so fascinating is because this comes from research now, all the way back from 2012, when I started to ask people, what are their values? And they unfortunately all fell into being a parent, a partner, and or a professional. They became their roles. Their values became their roles. That's what happens in a capitalist society. And so I had to find a way to get to people's values that weren't just parent, partner, professional, family, friends, work. I had to get to really deeply have values so that then we can help people sort of find their creative pursuits, because otherwise then we're giving terrible advice, like just go back to what you like to do at 6. Mm-hmm. But as I told you at 6 and 7, I was writing checks for my mother. There was nothing good back at 6 or 7. That is not helpful advice. We want people, and we see the value of people following their values-led curiosity. I'll give you just one example I did this fun exercise with a literal actuary who manages risks for a living. She ended up picking rock climbing, and we ended up going into the exercise, which we'll do together. And her top value was risk, which I thought was so interesting. And she said, my entire life is about managing risk. At home, I have a toddler, don't climb on that. I'm an actuary at work. And so for me, the thing that makes me feel like I can't believe I just did that is when I center risk. Mm. And when you say to somebody, I'm going to go disappear from my toddler for a day, as a woman especially, and say, I'm going to go rock climbing, and she likes to do the free solo kind, people are going to say, you're crazy. You're a terrible mother. But if she says, I manage risk all day, and my Saturdays are for risk, which is my number one value.
And I give myself permission to do this.
I give myself permission to be unavailable for my roles, to pursue my values. It becomes easier to ask for what we need. Mm-hmm. So that's why I thought it'd be fun if you could pick someone for us, and we can go and do the exercise with them.
So one of the things that's come up actually, so can we, before we just do this exercise, just really briefly, and I know it's going to, hopefully it won't take too long, but there are just, what is some of the, in your book, you do talk about some of the common obstacles of why people don't do this. I just think it's just gleaning just a quick overview of what those are, is because I just saw somebody sort of say in the comments, like, I look up to those kinds of people as if they are not capable of being that kind of a person.
Okay, let me look at no, Lisa, you are that type of person. Those types of people are you.
Yes, we are all capable, but let's talk a little bit about just really briefly what those obstacles.
Absolutely. So first, it's going to be the one we deal with in the exercise, which is the permission to be unavailable from your roles. When I start to help people understand that they have values outside of their roles, then they can start to really envision and dream about what those activities could be. So the permission to be unavailable was number one in our surveys and in all of our research. Number two hurdle to the rock climbing, the piano playing, the trapeze artists, these are all real people doing these things, was guilt and shame. Mm-hmm. So people would say to me, it wasn't just women, that when they embark in an activity like this, that they do believe they have a permission to be unavailable from their roles, but that guilt and shame sort of ruins it, Nadine. Mm-hmm. So let's just explore that, and then we'll explore the third one. So in that case, I think this is where my work, I do a lot of work with Dr. Becky, who's also a parenting expert. And we have this framework that I think works really well. We both have a version of it, where we explain that guilt and shame are such interesting emotions, because not unlike sort of sadness or anger, you're not really acting on those emotions most of the time. Maybe you yell a little bit, but guilt and shame actually make people change what they're doing to short-term solutions that may not be in their long-term interest. So a single mother who told me she rented out the music room because she has a rent-stabilized apartment where Juilliard students practice. She rents out a music room. She starts to play piano, and she tells me that the sun sets. She sees that it's getting dark in New York. It's 4:00. She runs to go get her son from daycare because he doesn't like being in daycare in the dark. So she automatically got the guilt and shame and changed what she was doing in her mind, because she could, even though she booked the room, she had the best of intentions. Mm-hmm. Not her fault. But I think this is something that really helped me understand guilt and shame. Just like the definition of mental health really helped me understand why we need unicorn space. Guilt is only something where you're misaligned with your values. So you can feel guilty if you yell at your cab driver because you're on the way to the airport and you're going too slow. Because when you get to the airport, you could say, wow, I felt guilty for yelling at that man. He did his best to try to get me to the airport, and I shouldn't have yelled at him. Feeling guilty for playing piano is not actual guilt, because you can't feel guilty for something that's in alignment with your values. So what that is instead is you're anticipating someone else's discomfort.
Judgment.
So in that moment, she was anticipating her son's discomfort with staying late. And so she acted on her son's discomfort. We need to take that tennis ball and throw that back to the other person if it's in alignment with your values, which is why I'm so obsessed with understanding what your values are. It is not helpful to call that guilt. It is not guilt. It is your principal says, no, you can't take professional development time to go, learn to play tennis or to be the tennis teacher that you want to do after school. The idea that you're asking and you say, okay, forget it, I won't bring it up again, is because ultimately that person's discomfort feels really bad. And so I think it's really, really wonderful to understand that that's actual. We should not feel guilty for things that are in alignment for our values, because it's actually not guilt.
So it's very interesting. I do a lot of work around emotions too. And one of the things that we work on with kids, with My Mama Says, around guilt is actually questioning, is it your guilt? or is it somebody else's?
Right.
And that's kind of touching on the same thing, right? Is this
100%.
your emotion or is this, because if it's not yours, let it go.
Yeah. And I think especially women we're very, very, very good at taking on other people's discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think that it was easy for me to say, I'm going to write a book, as my husband says, that portrays you in a terrible light, and I'm going to do it on Sundays where you're going to have full childcare of our 2 kids, eventually 3 kids. There was not a cheerleader that came out cartwheels. This is the best thing in the world. It was, okay, I don't know what charade this is and what, but I had such conviction that this was part of my values to share my story that I said, I'm holding this boundary. I can take the kids Saturdays, but Sundays is mine, right? So it helps us if we understand and we center, exactly as you said, our values in this type of practice.
Okay. Do you want to do the exercise?
Yeah, so pick somebody.
All right. Who wants to do this? Sarah, do you want to do this, or Deb? One of you? Whoever unmutes first. Everyone should follow along, by the way, because I think
this is for everybody. This is just, we're going to use somebody as a contestant.
So even as you're listening, please, think about this and follow along. We can all do this together. So
amazing. Deb.
I'm up for it. Go ahead.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so everyone's going to follow along. This is a values exercise. And again, if you're interested in doing this with your kids in your classroom, I'm happy to send you a prototype. These are not, in the world yet. These are just a prototype we're gathering data with. But okay, Deb, so this is how we play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you 50 unicorn spaces that actual people have told me that they do. And I want you to pick one. That's going to be hard, probably. I want you to pick one. And it doesn't have to be something you do now. It definitely doesn't have to be something you did as a kid or even something that you're possibly wanting to do as a side hustle for money. I just want you to pick one card that is just speaking to you today. And sometimes, I've done this with the same person a couple of times and the card changes every time they do it, which is totally fine. So you're just going to pick one card, and everybody in the chat, if you could do that too, and just throw, if you don't mind telling us what their card is. So since I didn't have the foresight to give Nadine the PowerPoint, I'm just going to have to read them to you, Deb, and read them to everybody. But it'll take 1 minute, and it's 50.
I wonder, can we also share it in the podcast as a document? Like,
absolutely, yes, you can absolutely do that. We can do that. But for right now, I'm going to read you. Don't yell out until you hear all 50. Okay. Florals, gardening and farming, photography, woodworking, music, metallurgy, stitching and needles, arts and crafts, otherworldly pursuits. That's like tarot, astrology, and magic. Genealogy and lineage, storytelling, water sports, outdoors, travel and culture, performing, animals. That's not just having one. That's like raising, riding, showing them in those competitions. Dance, martial arts, rhetoric. That's like running for office. Sports with wheels, running, marathons, or 5Ks, 10Ks, triathlon, sports with balls, snow sports, spiritual wellness. That's running yoga retreats, religious retreats, I had one amazing woman who told me she's being ordained to be a pastor, circus, theater and production, racing. That could be cars, horses, or boats, coding and engineering, baking, teaching. Well, I'm not going to let you pick that one since maybe you do that for a living. Restoration and renovation, cooking, building and DIY, arrows and axes, beauty. That's like the TikTok tutorials, not just putting on lipstick. Math and sciences, research and learning, design, writing, fashion, finding, collecting, and foraging, language and anthropology, event planning, health and wellness. Again, that's like running a spin class, being an amateur nutritionist, games, escape room, puzzles, designing, any sort of crosswords, and or pottery.
Ready?
So, yes, I'm ready.
Travel and culture.
Oh, I love that one. I'd say that's mine like every other time that I do this exercise in my head. Okay, so this is the 2 questions. And if you have cards that you've picked, we'd love to see them. And oh, yay, people are already putting them in. I love it. And Nadine, you can give people accountability partners for each other if people's match up, which I love.
Absolutely.
Okay, we already have Lori and Deanna are both gardeners, so that's great. Okay, so Deb, tell me about the first question. Number one is why? Why did you pick travel and culture?
I think that before I was married and had a child, that I spent time focusing on traveling. And that's the part of me that I've lost
Hmm.
since then. Haven't had time, money, um, mostly time.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I think I missed. That's the part that I feel if I could get that back, it would be an investment in me time, in time to learn about things and not have to teach about them, like learn about them because I want
Yeah.
to learn about them, not because I need to plan a lesson or go back and teach other people about what I'm doing. Just having some time to just really invest in me.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Well, you're already went into question two, which I love, probably because you're an educator, which is, I want you to picture a trip that you took. Do you have a trip that you took that was meaningful to you that you can remember?
Absolutely.
Okay, so picture yourself in a scene in that trip. So not the whole trip, but like picture yourself in a building or museum on the street
Mhm.
and eating a food. I want you to help me come up with 5 values. You already had one, which was lifelong learning for yourself. So that's a lifelong learning, not for teaching, but for yourself that I heard. But I want you to tell me if you picture yourself in that plaza or whatever, what I need 4 other values that it brings up for you.
Oh, all right. So first of all, I have to tell you that I think about this scene every day. There's a picture in my living room
Oh,
that
I
it's literally below the Eiffel Tower when I
love
went to Paris and I was standing and talking to my parents on the phone, which by the way was not a cell phone. There were not cell phones back then.
right.
Literally a payphone at the bottom, at the base of the Eiffel Tower that I was calling. And I stood up and just took a picture while I was on the phone. So I think the value for me was just
Mm,
connecting, because I connected with my family to share that.
mm.
To me, it was an intimate moment. I remember crying all the way from my hotel all the way to the Eiffel Tower because I had taken French for 6 years in high school and middle school and had always said, I want to go to the Eiffel Tower. And the minute I saw it, I just lost it. And I cried the whole way there. And I feel teary
Mm.
just thinking about it. So I think making that connection because it connected me to people, the
Oh, I love
students,
that
the
so
other
much.
students in my class, my teacher who's since passed away, who taught in the district that I now teach in.
Oh,
So
wow.
connections, connecting to people, um, speaking the language, to be able
Mm.
to come back and speak a language that I had learned years and years ago. So to be able to bring that language back, so making connections, learning about the culture, like really embracing going and ordering a food and being able to explore like what's in that food? How do you make that food? Can I do that at home?
Love these.
There's so many rich experiences that just being in different places bring me. It's such happiness.
Oh my God. Well, Deb, first of all, I feel like the game show should be like, we all just get you a trip back to Paris. But I think what's even more beautiful is I want to gift you back these values. So what I love about what you just did was not one of those, yes, you had family because you connected with your family, but it wasn't the typical parent, partner, professional values. I'll tell you what I heard. So you said that you want to learn just to learn, not because you have to teach anybody. You said that it brought you real, true, deep connection. That when you were there, you got to practice skills, new skills, like your new language skills. You got to communicate with others. You got to embrace other cultures and you got to explore. So I love those values for you. And so, what I would love for an accountability partner to do, or for you to have the practice for now, again, with the time constraints, the money constraints, it does not mean we have to send you back to the Eiffel Tower tomorrow. But, Deb, what you can do though, is you can check in with yourself in again, a values based curiosity practice to just ask, did I get to learn for myself this week? Did I learn anything for myself this week? Did I connect with anybody new this week? maybe outside of my roles as a parent, partner, or professional? Did I get to practice new skills this week? Did I get to communicate with others this week? Did I get to embrace other cultures this week? Did I get to explore this week? And so what's so fun about this, again, and Nadine, we can give this back to Deb, but I think those are beautiful values to check in with yourself, that you should have at least one a week. This week,
I love
I'm going to
that
practice
idea.
learning for myself. This week, I'm going to practice connection with people outside of my workplace. This is practicing new skills, which could be sitting down and starting to speak French, right? Outside of a lycée. We want to embrace other cultures and explore. So what's great also about this is the third part of the game, which again, I know we're over. So I wanted, because Sarah unmuted really quickly, I thought, Sarah, what you could do for us, and maybe Julia and Irene, is if you want to play the game a little differently, what we can do for Deb. So that was game one, and you can play that with your students. I'm happy to give you the prototype. It's actually really fun to do with kids, to see what they pick and then force them to go to their values, which they're not used to talking about on that level. It's really, really fun. But another really fun way that we've seen people use it is that you now have these friends, these other contestants. So again, so we have Julia, Sarah, and Irene. And I want Sarah, Julia, and Irene to pitch you a remix. So another one of those cards to remix with travel and culture. So for me, I'll give you an example. I want to remix baking. And I'm going to say, my pitch to you is that you get a cookbook. There's some great ones from Moroccan culture, from Israeli culture, from the Middle East, from France. And I want you to practice in that cookbook, cooking a recipe, baking a recipe from French. So that's what I'm pitching as a remix, the baking card remix with travel and culture. So not to put you on the spot, Sarah, but do you have another idea for Deb? And then she can pick an idea that Nadine will follow up with her on.
Going along with that, so maybe music. I want you to find a French artist that you can see in concert that maybe is local, or you don't have to go too far.
I love that. And Sarah and I work together. So
We do.
He knows you.
She will find, there's about 6 people on here that I know very personally. So I know I'm going to start getting calls and texts about all of this. So I think that's another piece of this, is just having people that can help you to find a little bit of that time and space to get a little bit of it back, however you can do that. So that's awesome.
I love that idea of a French artist. And just, again, we don't have to do curiosity, connection, completion, entire cycle. You don't have to jump into the Atlantic Ocean. As this one polar bear just told me she did, that was her curiosity, connection, and completion to become a polar bear. We can just start with your values, and we know what your values are. And then if you get to embrace another culture through music and travel and culture local, I think that's such a beautiful idea. So I already give Sarah a one up on my baking idea, but let's go to Julia. Do you have another idea for Deb?
Julia, I think you're on mute still. Yep.
There we go.
Hi, Julia.
Hi. I don't know. Sorry, my dog wants to go. I don't know, because the music one is really good, and I thought the cooking from a different culture really tapped into maybe take it a different step to give yourself that unicorn space and alone time is try a restaurant from a different cuisine, but go by yourself.
Oh, sounds so good. I want to do that.
So like bring a book or listen to music. Sorry, Luna, gotta go. Bring a book or listen to music from your French artist at a different restaurant of cuisine you've never tried before.
Oh my God, I love that, Julia. That sounds so amazing. I really, really love it. Oh, Randy has an amazing one to pair photography. That to revisit the Eiffel Tower one. Oh my God, this is the problem with working with educators. We could do this for another like 3 hours, because you just get things in a way that, normal people don't. Okay, Irene.
Well, I thought music too, but then also mime and Moliere. learning some mime skills and embracing others. I was thinking about that value and skill and connection with theater.
Oh, I love that. Performing and using sort of, I love mime. I think that's so fun. Or another type of French art to do. Javier, do you have one last to sign us off? Any other suggestions for Deb?
Maybe I was thinking about movies. Sometimes they have interesting movies, interesting French player artists. They are really very good job. So sometimes I really want to see French movies. I really impressed how the directors from another countries, they create a great movie. So it's posted to them. So I really like it to have this collection for Criterion. And so some of these movies are coming from French, Germany, and other countries. They made good movies, I believe. So it's another part of the option that I can maybe think about it.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I never heard of Criterion until it was in the New York Times Sunday section this week, Javier, and they were talking about how much they curate foreign films. So you can get a Criterion membership, Deb, and they can start, and you can curate through their collection. And as Javier said, a lot of their movies are foreign filmmakers with subtitles. So, or you can just listen in French, which would be so exciting. So I love this group. You're also creative already because this is what you do for a living. So I think taking the spirit of this, playing with the exercise, understanding that you also matter, not just your roles, is where I can leave you with that gift. But Deb, thank you for being so vulnerable and having such a beautiful story for us. I really appreciate you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And Eve, thank you so much for your time. Now everybody gets to see why I wanted her so desperately to be on, because I really think that when we take the time, even just to reflect on what are my values and how do I get more time, and then finding your community of people, whoever that is. It can be your neighbor, it can be someone, a friend, it can be a colleague, it can be one of us, that you can share that with and bounce some different ideas off. Just now with this exercise, we saw Deb have initially there was one idea, and then there were all these other ideas that came to light because of the community around us. So I think having the discussions and having the dream is sort of a piece of all of this. And I think that's what ignites something. How many of you right now feel a little inspired and ignited and you feel a little bit more energy, right? Because you think, okay, well, if Deb can do it, then I can do that. I can do that too. I can start thinking about what it is for me. And then there's some actionable steps that we can take. I know for me, it was writing. And after I heard that podcast, I started giving myself 4 hours every Sunday as well. And I started writing more. And it's just, it is that after you've done it, it's like, I did that. And it's such a great feeling. And we get to pat ourselves on the back. So Eve, again,
thank you all.
Thank you for your amazing work. I can't wait to see what's next for you.
Javier, and just remember, gym is self-care. That's the bottom of the barrel. You absolutely need it. But to elevate it, if you're going to make it a unicorn space, teach a class. I could totally see you teaching a Zumba class or a strength training class.
Yes.
I can see yourself sharing yourself with the world in that way. But thank you all. And again, I really appreciate this so much. We see all your unpaid and emotional labor in addition to your paid work as educators. And Nadine, I'll send you all of the links to the game and to the home equity curriculum if anybody's interested in giving us data for that. We love data, so we really, really appreciate it.
And thank you again for the books that everybody received. And I think just your passion and your different perspective. It's a very, I think it's a unique perspective that suddenly becomes obvious once you've unveiled it. And I think the world needs a lot of unique thinkers. So I'm really, really happy that you're not just limiting yourself to the law and you're taking on these other things, because the world is better for having you in it. So thank you.
I got an apple from a teacher. I'm very happy. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. That was the fabulous Eve Rodsky. sharing with us her work on fair play and unicorn space. And I hope everyone got something out of that. For me, I think the biggest takeaways really were, can we make visible the invisible and be able to allocate it appropriately? Like, here's all the stuff that needs to get done, who's going to do what, and checking in with ourselves and with our partners and our organizations systematically, not when emotions are high, but just, in a systematic way, maybe every Friday for 30 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, being able to check in with ourselves and say, here's the stuff that needs to get done, who's doing what, and how do we feel about that? Do we feel like that's fair? And one of the things I love about Eve, it's not about 50-50. It's about what's fair for one family or one organization might be different to another family or organization. And it's going to change. Everyone's unique. The thing I love about the unicorn space, and I hope everybody felt like it was a little bit more relatable to them, that it was, or at least plausible for them to go and search of, what is it that feeds my soul? What is it that I'm curious about? And how can that drive creativity and then feed that energy to my soul, so to speak? So how does that feed me so that I ward off that burnout and ward off that overwhelm? So I hope those were some of the takeaways. I do think that having a connection with someone that is able to hold you accountable, that you're able to share things with, is a really important piece of that too. I encourage everyone to read those two books, Fair Play, and also Unicorn Space, Reclaiming Your Creativity. And being able to also, you can also check out the Hulu documentary, which is very, very engaging. And we'll put all of the links to all the materials, resources, curriculum, and everything in the notes. And thank you guys again for listening. If you can, please help us spread the word by sharing and liking the episodes. It all helps. Subscribe to our channel. We're all available on all the major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Amazon, and iHeart. So as you're walking your dog, as you're getting to school, as you're taking the bus, as you're in your commute, whatever it is, have a listen. And hopefully, if you like it, share with your colleagues. Thank you again to all educators who are listening. We appreciate you.